2020, two organised crime groups based in Greater Manchester and Rochdale are running a drug empire worth somewhere between 70 and 90 million pounds. They're moving cocaine, heroin, crack and MDMA across the UK on a huge scale, keeping stash houses full of cash and weapons, and they feel completely untouchable. Not because they're being careful, not because they've covered their tracks well, but because of a phone that they genuinely believe nobody on earth can hack into. They're about to find out how wrong they are, and the way it all comes crashing down is honestly one of the most satisfying things I've ever come across in a true crime case. So these two networks are operating like actual businesses. There's a clear chain of command. You've got the bosses at the top who never touch product, coordinators underneath them handling the day-to-day logistics, couriers physically moving drugs from one place to another, and then street-level dealers pushing it out to buyers. Everyone has a specific role, and everyone stays in their lane. The people giving orders make sure there are enough people between them and the actual drugs, that even if a street dealer gets picked up by police, there's no way to connect that arrest back to the people actually running everything. They've also got multiple stash houses spread across the region, places set up just to hold drugs, guns, and big piles of cash. They rotate them regularly, so no single location stays active long enough to draw attention. The operation is genuinely well organized, and for a long time it works. Police know that large-scale drug trafficking is happening in the area, but they can't get close enough to the people in charge to build a proper case. And the reason they can't get close is a device called EncroChat. If you've never heard of it, EncroChat was a phone built specifically for people who didn't want anyone reading their messages. No camera, no GPS, no microphone. Nothing that could be used to identify or track the person using it. It ran its own encrypted messaging system, and the whole selling point was that your conversations were completely private. Law enforcement couldn't read them, governments couldn't access them, and if you ever felt like things were getting risky, you could wipe the entire device with a single button press in seconds. These phones cost about £1,500 for a 6-month subscription, and tens of thousands of people across Europe were using them. A lot of those people were criminals, and the members of these Manchester networks were completely hooked on them. They used EncroChat for literally everything. Coordinating shipments, confirming drop-off locations, discussing how many kilos were going where, sending photos of product, updating each other on how much cash had come in. They were talking about Class A drugs with the same energy you'd use to plan a group holiday, because in their minds, there was zero chance anyone would ever see a single word of it. Law enforcement knew EncroChat existed, and they knew criminals were relying on it. But every attempt to break the encryption had failed. The servers were based overseas, the security was tight, and there just wasn't a way in. So these groups kept growing, kept earning, and kept feeling like the system they'd built was foolproof. At its peak, EncroChat had around 60,000 users worldwide, and a massive chunk of those users were people involved in serious organized crime. But then French and Dutch authorities figured something out. Working together over the course of months, they managed to get inside the EncroChat servers. And when I say inside, I don't mean they cracked one phone or intercepted one conversation. They compromised the entire platform. Every message being sent through EncroChat was now being copied directly to law enforcement in real time. Photos, voice notes, text conversations, all of it. And the people using the phones had absolutely no idea. In the UK, this became Operation Venetic, and it was one of the biggest law enforcement operations the country has ever seen. Investigators were now reading live conversations between drug dealers as they happened. They could see exactly who was giving orders, who was carrying them out, where the stash houses were, what was being stored in them, and exactly how much product was being moved on any given day. They had screenshots of people openly discussing multi-kilo cocaine shipments, all of it time-stamped, all of it tied to specific devices, and all of it being saved. So by the time the raids actually happened, police already knew everything. They knew who to arrest, where to find them, and what they'd recover when they got there. Every single door they kicked in had already been identified through EncroChat messages, and the scale of what they ended up seizing was enormous. Huge quantities of Class A drugs were pulled from stash houses and vehicles. Firearms were found hidden in compartments. Piles of cash, some of it vacuum-sealed and stuffed inside walls, were found. Officers were hitting locations across Manchester, Rochdale and beyond, all at the same time, early in the morning, so nobody had a chance to tip anyone off. And everything they found matched up exactly with what they'd already read in the EncroChat messages. What people said they had, they had. Where people said they kept it, that's where it was. And that's what made these cases basically impossible to fight in court. The prosecution didn't just have surveillance footage or witness testimony. They had the defendant's own words. Defense lawyers tried to argue that the EncroChat evidence shouldn't be allowed, that the hack was illegal, that there was no way to prove who was actually behind the keyboard. But the courts ruled it was admissible, and once that happened, the whole thing was over. Members of both networks were convicted one after another. Drug supply, firearms, money laundering, the lot. The sentences were heavy. Some of the top guys got over 20 years each. People who had been running a multi-million-pound drug operation just months earlier were now watching it all get taken apart in a courtroom using evidence they'd created themselves. And the part that really gets me is that EncroChat actually tried to warn its users. Before the arrests started, a message went out to every device on the platform saying it had been compromised and telling people to destroy their phones immediately. Some people panicked, smashed them up, threw them in rivers. But it didn't matter at all by that point. Law enforcement had been collecting messages for months. Everything was already saved. Getting rid of the phone didn't get rid of what was already sitting on a server in France. By the end of Operation Venetic, these two networks were completely done. All because they trusted a phone that promised them nobody would ever read their messages. What do you think about EncroChat? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe while you're there.